the company, the assets, the accounts. If something were to happen to Kofi, God forbid, who gets everything? That was the first thing Serena said. Not how is he? Not is he going to be okay? Not even I'm on my way. The company, the assets, the accounts. And she said it to her friend Tanya on the phone, in the hospital parking lot, 48 minutes after Kofi Mensah had been rushed into emergency surgery, following a stroke that had left the entire left side of his body paralyzed. 48 minutes. And when she finally walked through those hospital doors, she was carrying 3 shopping bags from the Eaton Center. Kofi Mensah had built his construction empire from nothing. That is not a figure of speech. He had come to Toronto at 22 with 1 suitcase, a cousin's couch to sleep on, and a set of tools he'd brought all the way from Accra because he refused to arrive empty-handed. By the time he was 41, Mensah & Sons Construction was one of the most respected mid-size firms in the Greater Toronto area. He had built community centers in Scarborough, affordable housing in Etobicoke. He had given jobs to men who looked like him, men whose names hiring managers couldn't pronounce, men who just needed one person to believe the work was in them. He was proud. Quietly, deeply proud. The kind of man who drove a modest car and wore the same watch for 15 years, not because he couldn't afford better, but because he didn't feel the need to prove anything to anyone. His mother, Mama Abina, had raised him that way. She still lived in the small house in Scarborough where he'd grown up, the one with the garden she tended every summer and the kitchen that always smelled like groundnut soup. She had met Serena twice. Both times she had smiled politely, asked careful questions, and said nothing critical to her son. But the night after the second dinner, she had called him into the kitchen while Serena waited in the living room, and she had held his face in her 2 hands the way she used to when he was small, and she had said, "My son, is she kind? When no one is looking? Is she kind?" Kofi had laughed it off. "Mama, you worry too much." She had let go of his face slowly. "I pray I am wrong," she said, and she went back to washing dishes. Serena Okafor was beautiful in the way that made people stop mid-sentence. Long legs, perfect posture, the kind of laugh that made a whole room turn to look. She had grown up in Brampton, the daughter of Nigerian immigrants who had sacrificed quietly and completely so that their children would not have to. She had a business degree, a good job in marketing, and an Instagram presence that made her life look like a catalog. She met Kofi at a gala fundraiser for a youth mentorship program in the fall. He had been speaking on a panel. She had approached him afterward. Within 8 months, they were engaged. Kofi's friends threw him a party. His cousin Emmanuel clapped him on the back and said he was a lucky man. His mother made jollof rice and smiled at the right moments and said nothing wrong. But she watched. She always watched. The stroke happened on a Tuesday morning in February. Kofi had been at the office early, the way he always was, reviewing plans for a new project in Mississauga. His assistant found him on the floor beside his desk at 7:42 a.m. and called 911 immediately. His name was Dwight. He was 26 years old, the son of a Jamaican family from North York. He had been with Kofi for 3 years, hired fresh out of college when no one else would give him a shot. He rode in the ambulance with Kofi because there was no one else there yet, and he sat in the waiting room for 2 hours holding Kofi's phone, calling everyone on the contact list who needed to know. He called Serena first. She picked up on the 3rd ring. "Dwight, why are you calling from Kofi's phone?" he told her. He told her everything. The stroke, the surgery, the paralysis on the left side, the fact that they were still assessing the full damage. There was a pause on the line, a long one. And then, the company, the assets, the accounts. If something were to happen to Kofi, God forbid, who gets everything? Dwight said he didn't know. He said she should come to the hospital. Yes, of course, she said. "Which hospital?" he told her. It was a 20-minute drive from her condo downtown. She arrived 48 minutes later with 3 bags from the Eaton Center. She had gone shopping first. Now, you might be thinking, maybe she was already at the mall. Maybe she'd had plans. Maybe you shouldn't judge a person in their worst moment. And I want you to hold on to that thought, because what comes next will answer it for you. Kofi survived the surgery. The doctors told the family he would live, that the paralysis might be permanent, or might improve with aggressive physiotherapy, that they simply didn't know yet. They said he needed rest, consistency, care. They said recovery from this kind of stroke was long and unpredictable, and depended enormously on the people around the patient. The people around the patient. Serena visited the hospital every day for the first week. She sat in the chair beside his bed and scrolled her phone. She brought him flowers once, lilies, which he was mildly allergic to, even though Dwight had told her this before. She complained about the parking twice. She asked the doctor 3 times about the timeline for his full recovery, and the 3rd time she said it with a specific emphasis, like full recovery was a destination on a map she needed to reach before she could book her next flight. She did not hold his hand unless someone else was in the room. She did not ask him how he was sleeping. She did not notice or did not care that he cried alone at night. The one who noticed was Amara. Amara Serwa was 29 years old. She had come to Canada from Ghana 7 years before on a student visa, completed a personal support worker certificate, and taken a job with a home care agency. She was assigned to Kofi when he was discharged from hospital 6 weeks after the stroke, moved into the main floor guest room of his house in North York, while Serena kept her condo downtown. For convenience, she said, since she had work early most mornings. Amara was quiet. That is the first thing anyone noticed about her, not in a shy way. She could hold a conversation easily, laugh easily, disagree politely but clearly. She was quiet in the way that people are when they have learned to observe first and speak second, when the world has taught them that their words cost something, so they make sure each one is worth the price. She showed up at 7 each morning. She helped Kofi with his physiotherapy exercises with a patience that never once flickered into frustration, even when he was difficult, even when the pain made him sharp-tongued, even when he said he was fine and tried to do things himself, and ended up on the floor and had to be helped up again, which happened more than once. She cooked for him when the agency's mandate didn't technically require it, because she had learned from his mother what he liked, and it seemed cruel to her that a man recovering from a stroke should have to eat food he didn't enjoy. She learned which TV programs he watched, and made sure the remote was always on the side he could reach. She noticed that he slept badly and started leaving a small lamp on in the hallway at night because the complete darkness seemed to make it worse. And when she saw his light still on at 2 in the morning on a Thursday, she knocked softly and asked if he would like tea. He said he didn't want to be any trouble. She said it was no trouble. She made the tea and she sat in the chair by the window. Not beside him, just in the room, a respectful presence, and she didn't say much, but she stayed until he fell asleep. And she came back the next night, and the night after that, and it became a quiet ritual that neither of them talked about directly, the way the most important things between people often go unspoken. Kofi's mother came every Sunday. She would arrive at 11 with containers of food, and she would sit with her son for hours, and on her way out she would always stop in the kitchen to speak to Amara. At first it was small things. Thank you for taking care of him. He looks better this week. Then it became longer conversations about Ghana, about Amara's family, about the garden Mama Abina kept in her backyard, Amara had grown up helping her grandmother in a garden, and she knew things about plants that surprised Mama Abina and delighted her. They started to talk the way women talk when they trust each other. One Sunday, when Kofi was resting and the house was quiet, Mama Abina sat at the kitchen table with Amara and said, "You see him, the real him." Amara looked up from the dishes. "Most people see the house," Mama Abina said. "The name, the money. You see the man who is afraid he will never walk right again. The man who cries when he thinks no one hears." She paused. "That is rare. That is a rare thing," Amara said. "He is worth seeing." Mama Abena looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded once, the way people do when something they have been waiting to know has finally been confirmed. What Kofi was hearing, those months, when Serena visited, which became less and less frequent, was a different kind of conversation. It started with small comments. "I didn't sign up for this," said lightly, almost as a joke, but said, "I'm 28, Kofi. I have a whole life," said as though his illness were something he had chosen to inconvenience her with. "My friends keep asking when we're going to reschedule the wedding," said as though the wedding were a dinner reservation that had been pushed back too many times. He listened. He said little. He was still in the part of his illness where everything took enormous effort. The effort of getting through the day, the effort of the exercises, the effort of relearning his own body. And he had very little left over for defending himself or confronting the things he was hearing. But he was listening, and then one evening in April, his phone rang while he was in the bathroom, and Amara brought it to the doorway and set it on the counter for him without looking at the screen. But the call had already connected somehow. Maybe he'd bumped the answer button, maybe the speaker engaged. And when he came back to the room, he heard a conversation already in progress. Serena's voice. And Tanya's. But is he actually getting better? Or is this just what they say to be nice? The doctors say he might recover some function. Maybe 60, 70%. Okay, but 60% is not a man who can run a company, Serena. You need to think about this practically. I know you need to talk to someone, a lawyer. You need to know where you stand before the wedding, not after. I've already looked into it a little. If we're married, that's the key word. Because if you marry him now and things go sideways with the company. I know, Tanya. I know. Kofi stood very still in the middle of his room. He didn't say anything. He ended the call quietly. He sat down on the edge of the bed, and he stayed there for a long time. And somewhere in the middle of that stillness, something shifted in him. Not anger, not yet, but a kind of clarity. The kind that only comes when you have finally heard the thing you have been refusing to hear. He reached for the voice memo app on his phone. He pressed record. He set it down beside his lamp and he waited. He didn't have to wait long. Serena came by the next afternoon, unannounced for once, which should have been a good sign but wasn't. She sat on the edge of the armchair across from him with her coat still on, which meant she wasn't planning to stay. "I've been thinking," she said, "about the timeline." "What timeline?" he said. "For us, for the wedding, for everything." She spread her hands in a gesture that was meant to be reasonable. "Kofi, it's been 4 months. You're not getting better as fast as they said." "I'm getting better," he said. "You're still in a wheelchair." "I know where I am, Serena." She took a breath. "I'm not saying this to be cruel. I'm saying it because I'm trying to be honest with you. I can't wait forever. I have a life. I have." "What do you have?" he said quietly. She looked at him. She seemed, for a moment, thrown off by the directness of it. What is it you have, Serena, that is more important than the person you said you wanted to spend your life with?" There was a long pause. And then she said, with a careful gentleness that was somehow worse than anger, "I just don't think I can do this." He looked at her. He let the silence sit. Then he said, "I know." She blinked. You know, I've known for a while, he said. I just needed to be sure. She left 20 minutes later, and that was the last time she came to the house. What she did not know, what none of them knew yet, was that Kofi had been working with his physiotherapist privately for the past 6 weeks. 3 sessions a week, evenings, in the basement gym that Amara had quietly helped him convert into a therapy space. The left side of his body was responding. Slowly at first, a tremor, a twitch, the beginning of sensation returning in his fingertips, and then with growing steadiness. He had told no one, not his doctors publicly, not his business partners, not Emmanuel. Only Amara knew, because she had been there every night, and because you cannot hide recovery from someone who sees you every single day, who notices every small change the way a gardener notices the first sign of green after winter. When he first stood up from the chair with no assistance, 8 weeks before anyone expected it was possible, Amara had covered her mouth with both hands. Her eyes filled. She didn't say anything for a moment, and then she said, very quietly, "I knew you would." He had laughed. A real laugh, the first one in months. "You knew before I did." "Yes," she said simply. "I did. Here's what I need you to understand about Kofi Mensah. He was not a man who acted in anger. He was the kind of man who thought things through completely, who moved slowly and with intention, who believed, as his mother had taught him, that the truth does not need to be chased. If you are still long enough, it comes to you." He had been still for 4 months. He had watched who showed up and who didn't, who held his hand and who held their phone, who asked about his pain and who asked about his portfolio. He had heard the recording 6 times. He knew what he needed to do. He called Serena in May and told her he wanted to talk about the wedding, that he'd been thinking, that he believed they owed it to their families to see it through, that he wanted to give their relationship a real chance. He said it calmly. He said it like a man who had made peace with something. She came back, and because she came back, the wedding went forward. The venue was booked. A banquet hall in Mississauga that held 350 people. The caterers were confirmed. Mama Abina wore a gold gilo that she had been saving for this occasion and said nothing to her son about her doubts because she could see in his eyes that he had a plan and she trusted him. Amara was not invited to the wedding. That was Serena's doing. It would be strange. Having the home care worker there, it sends the wrong message. And Kofi had agreed without argument, which was the one moment that scared Amara. She had said to him, the morning of the wedding, while she helped him with his tie, "Are you sure about this?" He had looked at her in the mirror. "I'm sure about everything," he said. She straightened his tie and stepped back. "Okay," she said. He turned around. He was standing. He had been standing for 2 months. He crossed the room without the chair and picked up his jacket from the back of the door. She watched him go. The ceremony was supposed to start at 4. Serena arrived at 3:45 in a dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent. And she looked extraordinary, and she smiled at the guests the way she always smiled, like she was the most comfortable person in any room. And she took her place at the front without looking back. Kofi was wheeled in at 4 o'clock exactly. His cousin Emmanuel was pushing the chair. The guests who hadn't seen him since the stroke looked at each other. Some of them were surprised at how thin he looked. Some of them felt sad in the quiet, careful way that people feel sad when they don't want to show it. The officiant began. The readings were read. The vows were reached. And when it was Kofi's turn to speak, he said, "Before I say my vows, I need to say something to everyone in this room." Serena's smile flickered. "I've spent the last 6 months learning something," he said. "I've learned that the hardest thing in the world is to stay. Not to show up for the good days. Anyone can do that. Anyone can show up in a nice outfit on a good day. But to stay when things are hard, when there's no reward in it, when nobody's watching and nobody's keeping score. That takes something that most people don't have. He paused. I found out who stayed. He reached into his jacket and held up his phone. About 2 months ago, I recorded a conversation. I'd like everyone here to hear it. The room went completely silent. He pressed play. The company, the assets, the accounts. If something were to happen to Kofi, God forbid, who gets everything? And then Serena's voice clearer. I've already looked into it a little. If we're married. He stopped the recording. Serena had gone very still. The color had not exactly left her face, but something had. I am not angry, Kofi said, and he meant it. His voice was level, almost gentle. I understand that you are human, and that fear makes people say things they might not mean. But I also understand that I almost married someone who came to my hospital room with shopping bags and asked about my estate before asking about my pain. A sound moved through the room. Not a gasp, something quieter, comprehension. So I'm going to do something now, he said, and he stood up. He stood up from the wheelchair, slowly and with complete steadiness, and he walked, unassisted, without a cane, to the edge of the small stage, and then down the 2 steps, and then he kept walking, down the center aisle, past 350 people who were completely silent, until he reached the back of the hall, where Amara was standing. Because he had called her that morning. After she'd helped with his tie, he had called her from the car and asked her to come. She was wearing a simple yellow dress. She looked terrified. He stopped in front of her. You asked me this morning if I was sure, he said. She nodded. She could not seem to find words. I'm sure, he said. The room behind him erupted, not in anger, not in confusion, but in the complicated, overwhelming sound of people who have just witnessed something they will be talking about for the rest of their lives. Mama Abena, seated in the 2nd row in her gold jail, covered her face with both hands and wept. Not because she was sad, because she had asked her son, is she kind, and she had watched and waited and prayed for 3 years, and the answer had finally come. Not the answer she'd feared, but the one she'd hoped for, in a yellow dress, standing at the back of a banquet hall in Mississauga. Now, I want to ask you something, and I want you to think about it honestly. Have you ever had someone in your life, a parent, a friend, someone who loved you without asking for anything, who warned you about a person, and you didn't listen? Who said, look at how they treat people when there's nothing to gain, and you said you were being careful, you knew what you were doing, it was fine? Because Mama Abena saw it before her son did. Amara showed it without ever trying to. And Kofi had to lose the use of half his body before he could see clearly who was really beside him. The kindest people are often the quietest. The most dangerous ones often have the best smile. If this story made you feel something today, if it reminded you of someone, or something you've been trying to ignore, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you're new here, welcome to Fresh African Folktales. We tell stories that stay with you. Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Because Amara's story, it's only just beginning.